Welcome to Left, Right, and You with liberal columnist Jeff Ward and conservative public policy activist Alan Skillicorn on WRMN 1410. They're talking current events, politics, local, state, and federal. Your phone calls are always welcome at 847-931-1410, 847-931-1410. Now here's Jeff Ward and Alan Skillicorn and Left, Right, and You.
Welcome everybody. Today is July 25th. 2013, and if you're listening live, that doesn't really matter. Now it doesn't because you're listening right now.
But if you're dead, we appreciate you listening too.
If you're listening to the podcast, it does matter because you want to get the show right. So today is obviously the 25th of July, and you can find the podcast at firstward.net. You can also find the podcast at alanskillicorn.com, and you can send that link to your friends.
And we do not discriminate against our undead listeners. So if you're listening dead, you're okay too.
Well, someone could listen live, pass away, and be past tense. So.
Well, with HBO and all their zombie crap and vampire crap, we got to cover it all. Well, how the hell are you, Alan?
Very good. Yourself?
Can't complain. Running's going very well, and I'm not running from anybody or anything, so that makes it extra special. And hey, in an effort to affect something that had been near and dear to my heart, we discussed it here. Believe it or not, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring for Metroboard.
I thought that we already had a Metroboard for your area.
Well, sadly, Mike McCoy is a good guy. And if you recall last week when Jack Schaefer, the only Metroboard member that stood up for CEO Alex Clifford, called in, he exonerated Kane County from the morass. So that was kind of cool, but sadly, Mike McCoy is a good guy, and I think he voted for the golden parachute for honorable reasons. But considering the headhunting methodology out there, he resigned, saying that he no longer had the desire nor the time to serve, and so Kane County is going to have to come up with another one. And Governor Quinn, lest you think I'm trying to enrich myself, Governor Quinn just signed a bill removing all the benefits and pension accrual from such service. You still get paid, but all the
the part-time boards don't need pensions.
No,
I'll tell you, those people have full-time jobs.
So they have pensions. They had health care. So no longer. So, but yes, I mean, when you and I were ending the show last week, we talked a little bit about Metro, and one of your theories was, why don't we have these folks pay full freight? And I'm going to take a slightly different tack, especially when it comes to the CTA or the RTA. With gas prices where they are, and so many people, have downsized on their jobs, going to something less than they used to do.
Well, then wouldn't it make more sense that if they paid for, public transportation? I mean, in a sense, they'd be all sharing the cost.
Well, I mean, they do pay, but I'm willing. Republicans love subsidies. We know they're really good at it. I am willing to subsidize folks to get to work because I'd rather pay that meager amount than a much bigger welfare or unemployment amount. I mean, they say unemployment comes, but no, it doesn't. So
just make that point clear about unemployment.
Now, technically, you're supposed to pay into your own unemployment.
Correct.
However, those people who are employed tend to pay for those people who are not. And I would much rather have folks get to work. I would much rather have a little less carbon, and you can hear a little rasp in my voice from running. I would much rather have a little more green environment, than have all those cars on the road. So, but yeah, I just thought I'd throw that out.
And if
there.
I was one of those guys that was stuck in the Kennedy traffic every single day, taking the train into the city would be a viable option. And being stuck in traffic 2 hours isn't fun either.
No, it isn't. And you, not only the time you spend, but the crap you breathe.
It's actually pretty silly that people mostly still drive alone. Now, on occasion, I have to drive down McCormick Place or something like that, and it might the times might line up, and I'm not going with someone because I'm going for a special event or something. But if it was a regular commute, it would make sense to carpool or ride share or something like that.
Absolutely. So anyway,
and I don't want to seem to get all hippie on everyone here.
Well, but we know you are. Your hair's been growing more and more. But so that's my story. I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. God knows what'll happen. We'll see. But what's up with you, dude? Anything fun in your life, politically or otherwise?
I'm just trying to save taxpayers' money.
Okay, well, that's always a good thing, All right, well, since we've gotten the pleasantries out of the way, Why don't we also touched on the Trayvon Martin scenario, case, whatever you want to travesty, however you want to put it, at the end of the show, and you and I had a fun exchange on. I'm not sure if it was your website, I'm sorry, your Facebook page or the
Left Right You page,
but we did. But once again, I don't understand how the right wing is coming out and saying this isn't about race. Because had Trayvon Martin, race is more than saying the N-word. Had Trayvon Martin been white, it wouldn't have happened. It's really that simple.
I'm gonna bring up a personal story, and this was just a couple weeks ago, and there were a couple, I would call them juvenile delinquents, 13, 14-year-olds. Well, in my neighborhood, there's not a lot. We have really young children, and then we have older folks. There's not a lot of teenagers, and eventually the young kids are going to become teenagers. And that's I see that as an issue because I think anyone under the age of 18 is kind of unruly and problematic. But I saw these kids, 13, 14 years old, sitting and smoking cigarettes in our neighborhood. And to be honest, I don't remember what race they were. They're probably white though. And they weren't wearing hoodies because this was 2 weeks ago. It was hot out. But they kind of like they looked kind of that whole gangsta look and stuff like that. So what was my normal reaction? I'm thinking, wow, these kids could be up to no good, especially as I don't recognize them. They're young teenage kids, which I don't recognize from the neighborhood. And again, there's mostly young kids that are in our neighborhood. And I'm seeing them, and what my first thought was like, oh, we're gonna leave in a few minutes. My wife and I. Do I have to pull the car in the garage or something? Do I have to worry about vandalism? And that was my first thought, to be honest. And I know that kids that age make really bad choices. Even 18-year-olds make bad choices, but it seems like most kids, once they get to be 16, 17, 18, they might make bad choices, but they don't make the everyday really bad choices.
No,
like
and if
a 13 or 14-year-old
are sitting there smoking, I think their parents are not exemplary citizens, and that is
So, and if that wasn't race, I think they're probably white. Mm-hmm. It was. I just noticed them. I noticed the kids are kind of punkish. It raised my suspicion a little bit. And that wasn't race related. I think that was just, but did I do anything about it to be precaution? No, I didn't really do anything about it. But, I did think, is everything okay? And basically, I'm pretty sure everything's going to be okay. So in this situation with the Trayvon Martin, I think both gentlemen exercised really bad judgment. Unfortunately, Trayvon Martin, he paid the ultimate price. But, Zimmerman, he's, basically bankrupt now. He's got multiple suits and such.
Right.
I don't think that anyone, even the civil one, will stand knowing what I know about the law. But even if he isn't guilty, it doesn't mean that the attorney costs aren't going to bankrupt him even more.
No, and although, the thing is, when you saw those two kids, and in my neighborhood, which is predominantly white, way too white, in Geneva, there's kids smashing windows at the local school. So whenever I see anybody out there, what do? I call the police. You could have, on those kids, if you thought, well, if you get that gut feeling, and usually our gut feelings are correct, you could have called the police and they would have come out and checked it out.
Sure, they would have scared them away.
Right.
But they haven't done anything wrong.
But that's the point. But let's extrapolate to that to Trayvon Martin. The thing is, George Zimmerman called the police. He took that step. He called the police. Right or wrong, he called the police. And that's where it should. And the police said, "Don't."
We're actually going to agree on that point. I'm not so much sure that this is a race thing. I think that and I'm actually a little disappointed in you, Jeff, in buying into what the media is saying about this being race related. But if he did stop at that point, call the police, I'm not sure. Again, neither Jeff or I were there at the scene.
Right.
Neither Jeff or I were in the courtrooms, and I personally have not read the transcripts. I don't know if you've read the transcripts of the trial, and I don't know if. Let's say the police were going to come at that point. Okay, he should have stayed in the car, been at a distance, something like that. But getting
handled.
out of the car and chasing, but following.
It's handled.
Was a little bit farther. Well, it wasn't handled because the police weren't there, and I can understand the desire to want to keep an eye on him. But
but the police,
that was a bad choice.
This is a community where the police would have been there within a reasonable
I'm sure. If he was sitting here in his room, do you think he wouldn't regret that choice?
Which specific choice are you talking
of getting out of the car and following?
Yeah, probably. But again, he does. When I say it's about race, I'm not talking about overt, Klan. Some
I understand.
Racism.
I'm sure
I'm
listeners understand that too.
That the kid was black. If that kid was white Trayvon Martin
But
would not have followed him.
What about the kids
I'm
in my
sorry,
neighborhood?
George Zimmerman would not
What about the kids in my neighborhood? If I saw them doing something suspicious, maybe I would have watched them from inside or something. I don't know if I would have walked around.
I would have called the police. That's what I mean. And
I could do that too.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would call the police unless I saw them do something. Why don't we?
We have some calls on hold. Want to weigh in on Trayvon? If you're
why don't we?
All right,
why don't we have
not?
the first caller come on?
Okay, and that would be Jeff. Jeff, you're on Left, Right, and
Go ahead, Jeff. What's your question or comment?
Hey, kids, how you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm hanging in there. You know, this whole thing about Trayvon Martin, and I just heard it just a minute ago. Somebody said if it was white, they wouldn't hear about it, and you're right. You're actually right.
Well, it wouldn't have happened. If he was white, it wouldn't have happened.
Here's the thing. I solely blame, if you want to get all irate about it, I don't know why the white people don't.
Oh, Dave, what, did we lose Jeff?
What?
Jeff, oh, sorry,
Hello?
we got you back. There you are. You're back.
You know, the one thing I'm really puzzled about is the white people don't get on and say something about Jesse Jackson and Reverend Sharpton, because they're the two most vile, anti-white persons there is in this country.
Well, Jeff, just
the whole thing is to get everybody stirred up. Am I not correct?
If you've read my columnar history, Mr. Sharpton was a little bit out of my bailiwick, but I took on Jesse Jackson a number of times. And to the point where I made the Sun-Times nervous because, as you know, he's a columnist for the Sun-Times. So yes, I do think Jesse Jackson, and I think when black folks are killing each other in their own neighborhoods, they ought to be focusing on that and not,
And that's an entirely different subject, which I think we should have a show on.
Right.
But not today.
But anyway, Jeff, thank you for your comment.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
too.
And the Jeff that just called in is right about Jesse Jackson Sr., Jesse Jackson Jr. too, but also Reverend Sharpton. These guys are jerks. I mean, they are trying to take advantage, and to be honest, they make race relations worse.
They do.
And
but they're
sincerely,
ministers. They can't be jerks. They're pastors.
Well,
they're
I want to
doing
see.
God's work.
I want to see where they got their seminary degree from.
Jesse Jackson does have some redeeming qualities. I mean, when he himself admitted, that when he sees a black youth walking towards him, even he crosses the street. I think that goes.
But making a huge deal of it, just like the media, and unfortunately in this case, you, Jeff.
Nope.
I actually think make it worse because they credit instead of having this as dialogue, we can have adult dialogue, but when there's leaders, when there's idols talking about, if he wasn't black, this wouldn't have happened.
I'm not making it worse.
That is a big deal.
I'm holding both sides to the same standard. And the bottom line is, if he wasn't black, it doesn't happen.
You know what, Dave?
We do have one more call before we go to our next Jeff. Before we go to our guest,
it's
here.
a Jeffathon.
It's a Jeffathon, but actually we have Dan is on hold here. Dan,
hey
you're
Dan,
on Left, Right, and you have a comment regarding Trayvon?
Yeah, just a couple of quick ones. First of all, if you take a look at what the media came out with versus what actually went on in the courtroom and some of the other facts, the media completely, you'd think it was a completely different story. Many of the things that happened or potentially happened were never mentioned. Just like, remember that they made the big deal. They showed Trayvon Martin, as this young, wonderful-looking little kid, but they never showed the other pictures of him in more recent,
or the text messages talking about him in mixed martial arts and getting the fights.
I do think those are immaterial. It's immaterial for how.
And I was going to point out the same thing to Dan, because Dan is correct what he says, but there are some things that would have been prejudicial to the jury and are appropriately excluded. Mm-hmm. And just like,
well, I understand that, but what I'm getting to, before the trial started, you only saw him in the light of this poor, disadvantaged teenager that was taken advantage of by this adult white male, and he wasn't even white, to be honest with you. But that's what I'm talking about. Now, I have a slightly different take on the whole Trayvon Martin case. Isn't this just one more example of, and I know one of you guys is not going to agree with me, maybe both, the corporate media playing to the American people to keep us fighting each other once again. They go through the abortion issue, they go through, Second Amendment rights and so forth, to keep us fighting each other, not realizing just what's happening to 80% of us.
No, well, Dan, thank you for your call because we have to get to our guest. But my answer to that is it's not. The media isn't that bright. The media doesn't have it together. This is another case of the media doing a really poor job, doing a bad.
I really
job.
think it's the media going, we can sell a lot of ads.
That's it.
But but I'm going to reflect with. I mean, I think that you got caught in this too, Jeff.
No.
I really think you got caught up in this.
I mean, I finally decided I had to respond with the Bill O'Reilly wading in. No, I think let's forget the personalities. Let's forget the people. If George Zimmerman lets the police handle this, none of this happens. And
but George Zimmerman has been making a bad choice isn't because of his skin color or someone else's
yes,
skin color.
Yes, it is, because if Trayvon Martin was white, he would have either A, never called the police, or B, he would have let the police come. I absolutely guarantee it.
But none of us here, how can you make that assumption without any facts?
Because I know.
Because I make it up, or
here's a really good example, and we need to move on to our guest. But here's a great example.
Well, we could probably go along with this because it's good.
But as you know, my hometown Geneva. I was at the post office for my company. We do our Lapinator advertisement, and there's this African American gentleman wandering around the front of the civic courthouse, and my mind, I immediately went, oh my God, they dropped him off at the wrong court. Because the
courthouse.
The courthouse on 3rd Street. And so I went up to him. I said, don't tell me the cab dropped you off here for the courthouse. And he said, yeah, how do I get to the courthouse? Well, from that point, it's about 5 miles away. So I was done, and I just said, hey, you know what? I started telling him where it was and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know what? Get in the car. I'll take you out there. It's right by my house. There was about 6 people within earshot, and the looks I got from these white Genevans, the looks I got, they looked at me like I was out of my mind.
I would never say that racism doesn't take place. Even just a couple weeks ago, I had a situation.
If that kid was white, this doesn't happen. If that kid in front of the courthouse was white, no looks.
No one would ask them if he got dropped off wrong place either. He'd still be sitting there today.
So I think that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's totally different than what the media is talking about.
Can I just one thing, responding to Dan, saying to Dan that the media painted Trayvon as this, very nice kid, very, it's like, yeah, if you watch MSNBC all the time, that was the thing, it was saying Trayvon. And otherwise, if you watch other media, then would have gotten more of a fair and balanced portrait of both Trayvon and
or if
George
people
Zimmerman.
Read instead of watching TV. Turn off the TV and read.
I don't get this.
But my point is, it doesn't matter who these people are. It really doesn't.
Right.
What matters is, and you know what, George Zimmerman is, for all intents and purposes, George Zimmerman is white.
What?
Yes. And if Trayvon, if it could be any black kid, he would have followed him. The outcome very well may have been different depending upon the personality.
I don't know. If there is a kid dressed kind of gangster, white, Hispanic, African American, I think it raises the same. Especially, look at the context. This is a context where George Zimmerman was worried about his neighborhood. There's a bunch of vandalism. I think that the self-anointed neighborhood watch is a little weird and creepy. But just because it's weird and creepy doesn't make it illegal. And
a lot of neighborhoods have watches, but they
call
the police.
And just because, but he really made a bad mistake, and it's a shame. But I think it's a bad. I mean, going here on Anderson Cooper, or should I say Anderson Pooper? One of the jurors basically said, I think George Zimmerman is a man whose heart was in the right place. It just got displaced by the vandalism in the neighborhood and wanting to catch these people so badly that he went above and beyond, we agree on that, what he really should have done. But I think his heart was in the right place. It just went terribly wrong. And it goes on a little bit more, and if anything, Zimmerman was guilty of not using good judgment, she said. When he was in the car, he should have called 911. Obviously he did, and he shouldn't have gotten out of the car. Again, it's they both use bad judgment. He shouldn't have got out of the car, and Martin.
But his judgment was
shouldn't have started. In her opinion, Martin started the fight.
Right.
You know what? You don't start a fight unless you can finish it. I mean, and yes, Martin also. Martin Zimmerman. He could have laid in the fetal position. He wasn't going to kill him, and that was a mistake too. But there are situations where.
But then, I don't think his heart was in the right place, because essentially he was trying to take the law into his own hands. That's what he was doing at that point.
About the law in your own hands part is correct.
And the irony of ironies is his brother got on, I forget exactly what news channel, The Daily Show ran it, and basically said, now George has to watch out for some vigilante taking the law into his own hands. The irony was
yeah, but that vigilante will go to jail.
Well, most likely. But again, we
could go on for a while, but why don't we bring on Jeff Meyer, our legal analyst?
Jeff, are you there?
Yeah.
And we had some questions about stand your ground laws and Illinois' stand your ground law.
Okay.
You can help extrapolate for us.
Sure. Well, first, I want to clarify. It's not my opinion that Illinois is a true stand your ground state. It is true that there's no duty to retreat in Illinois. That's been clear law since the Illinois Supreme Court spoke on the issue back in 1949. They actually, in that decision, this would be People v. Smith, do use the language stand your ground. But I think where there's some ambiguity is in how that has since been interpreted and really applied by the courts. When a court charges a jury, one of the things that they give them are called jury instructions. They're a statement from the court as to what the law is that they need to consider when they're making a decision in a particular case where self-defense has been asserted. And those instructions don't use the language stand your ground. They almost to the letter use the language that appears in the criminal code, where they talk about the circumstances under which a person who's a non-aggressor can use lethal force to defend themselves or their property. One of the factors that is used is whether or not a person subjectively believes that their life is in danger or there's a threat of imminent great bodily harm.
Well, Jeff, let's cut to the chase a little bit. What's the difference between Illinois' law and Florida? What the central differences between the Illinois law and the Florida law?
I think the essential differences are, Jeff, are that the second prong, and that's whether or not the subjective belief, is objectively reasonable. And in Illinois, the courts have more favorably allowed jurors to consider the opportunity to retreat or avoid the situation in weighing whether or not the subjective belief was objectively reasonable. So kind of in a backdoor manner, the duty to retreat gets weighed.
Hey, Jeff, can I ask a question on that specifically? Because I looked up the statute in question, and it basically says use of force in defense of a person or against another person when the extent that he reasonably believes that such conduct is necessary to defend himself. That seems pretty wide open to me.
Well, and like most things in Illinois law, it's about as clear as mud, Alan. Mm-hmm. And you'll find that the appellate courts have all kind of taken slightly different tacks on it. In the first district, Cook County, for example, I think they more closely follow what I'm talking about, which is where this opportunity to retreat gets weighed as one of the considerations of whether or not the belief that someone needed to defend themselves with lethal force was objectively reasonable. So while it's certainly not codified, and I don't think required that a person retreat, it seems kind of like I said in a backdoor manner that gets weighed anyways.
But and Jeff,
that's the difference I think between us and Florida.
Okay. In all fairness, trying to as somebody who looks at state and county code quite frequently, in all fairness, trying to kind of map out what's reasonable self-defense would be a fool's errand. But isn't the true intent of, and I think maybe Florida went a little too far, but the true intent of these stand your ground laws or these defense laws were, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't they to mitigate the need to retreat? I mean, there was a time when you literally had to avoid the confrontation.
Well, and that's still the law in some states, Jeff.
Okay.
I agree that that's probably the intent behind stand your ground statutes, but Illinois doesn't necessarily have that. It's just always kind of been, at least for the last 70 years, been the law here that you have no duty to retreat. But what I'm trying to say is that isn't as black letter or as bright line as it may first appear if you read the statute.
Yeah, and it would, and again, I mean, there are so many situations. I mean, one of the ironies in Florida is the African American woman who tried to scare her abusive husband is now spending 20 years in prison. Apparently, the stand your ground law didn't apply to her. So, and that's just goes
or she didn't have a reasonable threat that.
Somebody who's been abused, I think.
Yeah, I don't know the situation that well, but there's definitely been a case in the past.
But that is the problem.
One thing I thought of while I was reading the law was in Chicago, it's been illegal to own handguns since 1982, or non-registered handguns. But you have people defending their property all the time. I mean, someone breaks into property, they get shot. I don't recall ever the city of Chicago or Cook County going after a gun owner for defending themselves. And I think that's, Jeff, do you agree that's kind of the reason this whole no duty to retreat is there? Because politically it's so, you can't go after the good guy just because he had a gun because he shot a bad guy.
Well, you could for gun laws, but go ahead.
But isn't that the case, Jeff, where how many times does Cook County go after these people?
I don't know that statistic offhand. I do know that there have been circumstances in the past where people have been prosecuted for gun violations, even when they lawfully used a weapon to defend themselves. I mean, of course, now the U.S. Supreme Court, has kind of spoken on that issue and to a great extent gutted Chicago's ordinances, and now we have a new state statute that goes a little further with some state preemption. I'm sure it's a factor that's taken into consideration by the Cook County State's Attorney's Office when deciding whether or not to pursue state charges. I mean, they may be using some even in the past, using some prosecutorial discretion in deciding whether or not to pursue those cases.
And from what I see, I mean, you read on the paper, people defending themselves all the time, especially before it was a law in Chicago, and it was illegal, and I don't see the prosecutors going after it because of that good guy versus bad guy dynamic.
And that's, in essence, that's what this law did.
It puts it into writing.
But then you're going to have to pay the price for whatever gun violation you did.
Well, and what I've saw in Chicago is many, many times is that the gun owners, maybe they confiscated the gun, but that's all they did.
And Jeff, before we have to go to break, does our self-defense law work? It seems to. I haven't heard any complaints about it. Does it work in Illinois, in your estimation?
It seems largely workable, but in like I said, doing some of the research I've done, it appears that there's not necessarily a real clear standard that's been set forth by the appellate courts or some conflicting authority that leads to ambiguity. That's problematic. And I think is something that if policymakers look at this going forward would be worth clarifying.
And when you said that sometimes you'll have instructions go to the jury, and if I was sitting there and I had instructions go to the jury basically saying you could weigh if this was reasonable, I go, well, that's in violation of the statute. Wouldn't that be something that you could appeal?
Well, the appellate courts have ruled, for example, that using or submitting a jury instruction or asking for a jury instruction to be submitted that uses the stand your ground language is not permissible. They say that's not the law in Illinois.
Even though there's court cases and that's what the statute says?
Even though there's a prior Supreme Court case that used that language.
So, wouldn't that be grounds to throw the case out?
Well, it's certainly grounds to ask a different court to look at it.
Okay.
But basically what the Illinois is doing, Jeff, is it's saying reasonability is up to the jury.
Well, and the courts have been pretty clear that that's an
or
issue
the
of fact.
Judges are breaking the law in their instructions.
Right. Well, either way. But Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. We always appreciate you coming on with our predecessors and with us as well.
Well, thank you for having me on. I greatly appreciate it.
Where can people find you if they want to engage your services?
Smith & Meyer, LLC. Our office is in Sycamore. I'm an Elgin resident, but we do very broad general practice. And if anyone wants to reach us, 815-787-7033 is our number.
All right.
Thank you very much. And we'll just very quickly share that this podcast is available at thefirstward.net and alanskillicorn.com.
And we will get to our new caller after the break.
And this is Left, Right, and You on WRM 1410 AM. Hi, this is Alan Skillicorn. Here's a reminder that Odyssey Forge offers creative, custom, and unique internet solutions. Looking for more security or two-factor verification? Odyssey Forge has a solution for you. Do you want custom WordPress site? Odyssey Forge can customize the popular platform. What about secure e-commerce? Odyssey Forge will develop an attractive site, easy to use for you and your customers. Check out www.odysseyforge.com or see my Odyssey Forge powered site, alanskillicorn.com. So last night I couldn't sleep. So I got my laptop going. And fortunately, when you're sitting in bed, it gets hot, doesn't have a good airflow. Even though it's a cool night, it's still uncomfortable.
Well, I got the solution for you. I invented a product called the Lampinator. And you can go to www.lampinator.com. It is a laptop.
You might have to spell that.
Lapinator. I found out in French it means rabbit killer, but so much for brand name testing.
Yeah, you're not going to be very popular.
No,
in France.
not in France. But basically, what the Lapinator is, Ellen, it's a portable insulated laptop vest that not only keeps 95% of laptop heat off your lap, so I don't have to get the fire extinguisher out every time you use your laptop, but it keeps your laptop 11 degrees cooler with no moving parts. So, hey,
that's great, and heat does damage electronics.
We sell all our product through Amazon, so you can get shipping free. Go to www.lapinator.com, www.lapinator.com. That's right. I'm stuck in the middle with you guys. I'm between Dave and Alan.
And this is left, right, and you, and we're going to go right to a caller.
Let's go, Tracy.
No.
Tracy, are you
left, right, and you?
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Loud and clear.
Okay. Hi. A couple of quick points. One, to Alan's point that corporate media is influencing this conversation and this debate, I respectfully disagree. That's a popular opinion predominantly made by white people, because black folks like me, we live racism. We're not waiting. We don't have to wait for the media to tell us how and what to think. We, unlike white people, aren't reading about it. We're living it. Second, everybody's got a point. I've heard several times that, from white people that, look, I look at white teenagers suspiciously too. It's not a race issue. Suspicious teenagers are suspicious teenagers. But I think what you have to do, you can't take this Trayvon Martin case in isolation and counteract it as Alan did. You have to look at the depth, breadth, and pervasiveness of how laws are disproportionately applied to the detriment of black folks, particularly black men. And as an attorney, I see this frequently when I'm in court.
Tracy, you're absolutely, the penalties for crack cocaine versus powder cocaine are incredibly.
And I don't think I'll disagree with her. I think you look at the prison populations and such.
Right.
So for that reason, then you can't take this case in isolation. The fact of the matter is, when you look, a white man is 354%, I think is the last stat I saw, 354% more likely to be found not guilty of killing a black man than if he kills a white man. Why? Because this society values white male life, particularly more than black male life.
Well, I don't know about that. And here's the thing we could get into. I don't think that this is all that comparable. It's pretty clear that African Americans and poor folks in general don't have the vigorous defenses that, as a whole, richer people or whiter people would have. And it might be a flaw of the criminal justice situation, but it's not a criticism of opportunity versus, typically someone has more money will have better lawyers. Someone who, and I remember when I was in college and I had a friend of mine, he was Hispanic, but who cared what his nationality was, but he made a dumb mistake, and I remember telling him, you need to retain an attorney. It might cost you $500. He's like, I don't have $500, and I'm like, it's going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars in the long run. You're going to save yourself a lot of money by getting an attorney. And he still said, well, I don't have the money. And I see that happening a lot.
Right, but the flip side, Alan, and Tracy, I was a columnist for 8 years, and I still write occasionally. And especially in dealing with Sheriff Perez here in Kane County, there's a lot of poor white folks, and most of the folks in the jail, which I took a tour of, are every bit as poor or economically disadvantaged.
It probably has to reflect the population as a whole to some degree.
But Mary, I got to tell you, and I've told this. I'm sorry, Mary's our next caller. I'm sorry, Tracy. I will stop doing that. I don't know if this is a defense of white folks or actually taking him to task, but until my wife and I went to an Indian reservation, the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, you don't understand that omission by subtraction mentality, that dismissal, that automatic assumption that Trayvon Martin was up to something nefarious. They did not want my wife and I there. They wouldn't look us in the eye, despite me being on my best behavior. It was just a total diminishing of your existence, and that's what white people don't get.
Jeff, and I want to address caller Dan, the prior caller's misguided point. Even if Trayvon Martin was Florida's biggest thug, and he wasn't, but let's just say for purposes of argument that he was, that night He was walking down the street minding all of his own business when George Zimmerman decided to stalk him, even though police were on the way. We know that George Zimmerman was itching to confront Trayvon Martin. How do we know? Because the stats
Well, wait a second. He didn't confront him, though. Hold on. That's a mistruth. That's not true. Trayvon Martin actually confronted. He's the one that came to him and threw the punch.
Right, but
other than what you said there,
he had called
George
46
Zimmerman
times to 911 to report suspicious black men in the neighborhood.
And George Zimmerman did
but just because he was insane doesn't mean it was racial.
Suspicious black men.
I mean, just because he was insane and he didn't have good judgment doesn't mean it was racial.
But it was.
Well, so there were no white men walking through the neighborhood ever?
How do we know some of those 40-some weren't against white people?
But again, and
no,
Tracy,
they all 46, 100% were black men.
Tracy's making the point too, Alan, that when you look at the grand scheme. I mean, another perfect example.
I agree with Tracy on that point. I mean, you looked at Indian reservation. Look at the hard times they are because we pushed them at those Indian reservations. That is true. That has happened. There has been a generational problem with African Americans. It started with the horrible things we did 200 years ago, and most of the stuff hasn't been rectified until recently. And it has created a situation that. For the most part, most African Americans don't have the best schools, don't live in the nicest neighborhoods, and that stuff is true. But I think that making an example of Trayvon, I don't think that helps the situation. I don't think it heals anything.
Tracy, did you read D.L. Hughley's book? I want you to shut up. I can't say the whole thing on the air, but his description. D.L. Hughley, of course, African American comedian, my favorite comedian. Yeah. His and sadly we're going to have to move on shortly, Tracy. He described living in an inner city neighborhood better than anyone I've ever heard, and I wish he had come up with some sort of solution. But the talk about when you're in a small aquarium, the fish never grow. But beyond that, but again, I think Alan and I are never going to agree on this. George Zimmerman had it within his power to avoid the confrontation completely.
See, that I agree. And you know what? I may disagree with Tracy's worldview on this, but she does bring valid points to the discussion.
And I totally
and I would
agree.
like to thank you two for having this conversation.
And we thank you for calling in. We don't get a lot of women, so it's nice, somebody.
Well, there's another woman on the line.
Our wives are here to keep us honest.
Thank you, Tracy.
Bye bye. All right, then we're going to go to Mary in Elgin.
Yeah.
Mary, you're on Left Right.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Mary.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. I want to start by saying I really appreciate the last caller, Tracy, and I was just very grateful to hear her very well-informed, careful explanation of her point of view. I'm calling today as a representative of Occupy Elgin.
Okay.
And on Saturday, the 27th, we are going to have a small rally in Elgin on the corner of Kimball Street and Grove Avenue, calling for justice for Trayvon Martin, calling for the repeal of the Stand Your Ground laws, and calling for a national conversation to uproot racism from our hearts.
Well, Mary, I got it. Thankfully the calls are coming in, but I wholeheartedly, even if you were more towards Alan's point of view, I wholeheartedly support. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Get out there at Saturday, and to our listeners, if anybody wants to join Mary in the Occupy Elgin movement, by all means do so.
And I do want to point out on this issue, I agree with Barack Obama because in 2004 he actually strengthened Illinois' Stand Your Ground law.
All right,
Mary, we have another
caller.
caller.
Much for calling in. Thank you so much for calling in.
Yes, we do. We got another caller. We got Thomas in Elgin. Thomas,
hey,
you're
Thomas.
on Left Right and You. He's got a short comment.
Hello, Elgin, and guests on the radio. I think that really what we're losing sight of here is that a man was told by the police that they would handle it, and instead he got out with a gun, hunted somebody down, and then he got his butt.
Wait a second. Trayvon Martin confronted him. That is absolutely untrue.
No, Trayvon Martin.
No.
Wait, who went up to him? Who punched who?
But who who started
Happened
that
on
fight?
Mr.
Well, you know what? You don't start
went
fights, you
after the
can't
guy with a
finish.
gun.
Tom, keep going.
Mr. Zimmerman went after. He was told by the police to leave
Right.
alone.
Absolutely.
He got out with a gun and he hunted the man down, and then the man defended himself, and then Zimmerman murdered him.
That's right.
And that
Wow.
was, that
Wow.
was first,
You know what?
that-
A
that
jury
was
of
first-degree
peers
murder.
didn't agree with that.
No, they didn't. They didn't. But that doesn't make it. Juries have been wrong before.
Yeah.
The bottom line
Well-
is he set. He,
Well, I don't know if it was murder.
He was so easy. It was
Was it
so easy
premeditated?
to avoid. No, I think he should have been convicted of manslaughter.
Yeah,
He
it wasn't
said-
But he was
murder.
I think he
charged
should
with
have been convicted
manslaughter.
of first-degree murder because he got out of that car with a gun and he went after somebody.
Thank you.
And he ended up murdering.
Thank you so much for calling in, Tom.
Yeah, even though he's wrong about it. I mean, he
He is
just
a
the way,
little extreme.
Just the way he said it, he got out of the car with a gun.
Well,
He did.
He's implying that he had the gun in hand, not in a concealed holster.
Yeah, but it doesn't
I mean,
matter.
but he's being
there-
dishonest in his language.
He's taking
being
over.
dishonest in
The
his
only
like-
reason Zimmerman got out of the car is because he had the gun. I mean, the whole defense
Well,
was.
that's
he's
the
such
other
whoa,
thing.
Whoa, whoa. The whole defense was he's such a pussy. He has to use a gun.
As someone who has a concealed carry license in Florida and Utah, one of the first things we learn is you try to avoid situations like
Right.
this. And if I had a gun on me, I wouldn't want to go into that situation.
Right.
I wouldn't want to go into a situation where, there's a mob or something. I wouldn't want to go into a situation where I think there's some. Maybe he didn't think it was going to be violent, but still, he because he did have the weapon. Think about it. He could have laid there and got pummeled. And what if the gun fell out? Maybe the guy used it on him. George Zimmerman did not think ahead in this.
Yeah, because everyone uses the murder, and I'm like, it has to be premeditated. Manslaughter probably would have been the.
Well, he was tried for second-degree murder, which there's no premeditation,
I wish
but
Tracy
it's
would have called back she's our attorney, right? Or
well,
child.
second degree has to do with you already had stuff in motion in process.
And the flip side, people are justifying. George Zimmerman for he's tired of all the vandalism. How many times was Trayvon Martin followed in his life, most likely? How many times
that's a
was
very
this
valid
happening?
point.
And for George Zimmerman not to understand that, I mean, I think it is reasonable to say that when there are confrontations, it depends upon the neighborhood. It depends upon which.
But
race
I don't
is
think
more
anyone's
dominant.
ever saying that he made that George Zimmerman made a right choice.
Right. But I do think
Is anyone defending him? See, I'm not defending him. I think he made some really dumb errors, and Trayvon Martin suffered
But
his life.
I still think up to reckless homicide when you make certain choices that lead to an almost inevitable.
So
conclusion.
how many years in jail did you want him to serve?
I think 5 would be appropriate for what he
Okay.
did. Do we have another caller?
We do. We have Rex from Elgin. Rex is calling in.
Rex.
Hi. How are you? Thanks for the program. Very interesting. I like the discussion a lot.
Thank you.
I want to commend Tracy for her comments too, and Mary for reminding us of the rally on Saturday near the library. The facts of the case seem to me to be pretty straightforward. George Zimmerman was a lone vigilante who carried a pistol even though his neighborhood watch duties discouraged carrying a weapon. He called 9/11 twice, and I'm very sorry. He was discouraged both times from engaging the suspect, as he called it, even though the kid was just walking home with a pocket full of candy and a cell phone. There was no reason for the killing.
No, and thank you so much, Rex.
But he is right. There is no reason for the killing. There really isn't.
There is. That's right. Exactly.
So
there was no reason for the killing. There was no reason for George Zimmerman's actions that night. An innocent kid.
Now, hold on. Do you think an innocent kid would attack someone?
I think many people.
Is that still
who were
innocent to you?
followed-
Yeah.
Will you let me answer, please?
Yeah.
I think many people who were followed probably very closely would turn and engage the person who followed them before they were hit. They would be afraid.
So were you there? Do you know he was being followed very closely?
I don't know, and you don't either.
Okay.
But
none of us in this room know that. But there's a lot of assumptions being made. When you said he followed them closely, you're making an assumption.
But Rex is right. The act of
Right.
following
You can
is
push
an
somebody
aggressive act.
until he strikes at you. You can bait. It's called baiting.
Right.
I think Trayvon Martin was baited by this person who was looking for trouble and found it.
Yeah.
He looked for it every night. He went out looking for trouble, and he found it. And he killed the trouble that he found. And he got away with it.
I would agree. Not as
I wouldn't say
strongly
he's
as
getting
he
away with it because he's going to be broke now.
and you know,
And he found that trouble, and you know what?
And
I hope that he regrets that.
Did you
Rex-
say that Trayvon Martin went out every night?
No, George Zimmerman.
You meant George Zimmerman.
And Rex, sometimes
Trayvon Martin was walking home
Yeah,
to his father's house. This fool was a vigilante running around with a pistol looking for trouble.
And Rex, you know, in my 8 years of column writing, and I'm just using that to give my statement some gravitas, sometimes karma is far worse than the law. And I think George Zimmerman is about to find that out. Thank you so much for calling in, Rex. We appreciate
Rex.
your call.
Oh, sorry. And we've got one more call here. Karen in Elgin has a comment for Left, Right, and You. Karen, you're
thanks
on
for
live.
calling.
Hi. While I was on hold, I realized my call is rather repetitious now. I was just going to say I'm tired of Trayvon being portrayed as the aggressor. I mean, he was a young man, 17 years old, walking down the street, and any one of my kids, if they were being followed, they would be scared to death.
Yeah,
and how can you blame him if he did throw the first punch?
Well, isn't that definition of being the aggressor?
Well, yeah, but
I mean, it is the legal definition.
But you're right. I think that if I have to put the onus on a 17-year-old kid, I mean, the things I did at 17.
No, I think the aggressor was the man following him with the gun.
Yeah.
Why was he following him?
And I think, you know, he had to, I believe George Zimmerman understood the gravity of following a black youth home. I really do. And I think he kind of hoped for a confrontation. I do. And sadly, I wished, you know, I am so, you know, Trayvon Martin's parents and the peace and dignity which they've brought to this, I'm overwhelmed by.
They've been incredible.
I wish Trayvon had the courage to avoid that confrontation. He is not completely.
Well, I mean, this is a kid that was somewhat. Well,
child.
Want to thank you for your call, and you know, Dave, can you look up the video for Reverend Manning? And while he's looking at that, you know, Trayvon Martin was a guy that, you know, had a lot of trouble in school. He was trouble. I mean, he was kicked out of his mother's home and he was living with his father.
But George,
this wasn't an innocent kid.
But he was.
Let's look at the big picture.
But he was that night.
That night, yes, he
George
was. But this
Zimmerman
was a kid that sought fights, that got kicked out of his mother's home.
That's defense.
Was already involved in stealing stuff.
That's defense in hindsight. It's not. You know, George Zimmerman knew none of that.
Correct.
And again, at 17...
have I ever defended George Zimmerman? I think he's a dope.
Yeah.
He found that video or not, Dave?
Yes, I did. I got the Reverend Manning video here. And let's see if it's on here. It starts right at the beginning, right?
Yes.
Got it. Okay, here we go.
The Martin Luther King Jr. houses. It's 10 o'clock at night. You get up out of your bed. It's raining at night. Well, maybe 7 o'clock at night. You go... park your car, you get on the elevator there in the Martin Luther King Jr. houses, and as a pastor going to pray with one of your members, and a 17-year-old boy gets on the elevator with a hoodie on. Just you and him on that elevator at night. Just you and him. Tell me, what do you think? Oh, this must be a prophet of the Lord. He's got a hoodie on. This must be one of the nicest little boys in the community. He's got a hoodie on. What do you think when you see that? Tell me, what do you think? Do you begin to protect yourself? Do you think you need to be concerned? Has it been proven over and over again that these hoodie boys rob, rape, murder, and maim? Are you afraid of him? Though you don't know who he is. You have suspicions because of that hoodie and because of the color of his skin. Ain't no telling what's going to happen to you on that elevator. And you know it's true. You know it's true. So why do you blame George Zimmerman? Why? Because you're black. That's why. You're not saved. You don't know nothing about Jesus, and you're full of hate.
You know, that's an interesting perspective, Alan. But the problem is, this is a case where you've got two innocent people going into an elevator. I mean, I wear a hoodie. I'm going to have to rethink this, my bright red shed aquarium hoodie. But in this case with this gentleman, the problem, again, I'm going to keep repeating it. And the callers have backed me up today. It's kind of fun. You know, normally we have all the right callers, as in left or right. But in this case, this wasn't a case where two guys got into some position by mere coincidence, an elevator in a housing project at 7 o'clock at night. This is a case where George Zimmerman, much older than the 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, had the chance to make the right decision, was told to make the right decision by the police, and did not. That's completely different. Yes, Trayvon Martin attacked him, but it never would have happened if George Zimmerman used his own good judgment.
And we haven't even
police.
disagreed on that. I mean,
Right.
he is
But
a
you
dope.
can't-
But just because George Zimmerman made a really bad decision getting out of the car, that is not murder. And when people say it is,
it is.
I mean,
it is.
Again,
it's
you said he wasn't guilty of murder just 10 minutes ago.
Yes, I said reckless homicide, which is not. He brought.
I think you said manslaughter, but
manslaughter
but
or reckless
here's the thing:
homicide.
when people are saying murder and they don't know what murder means, I mean, they're being disingenuous. They're hurting themselves. They don't even understand it. I think the media and dopes like you have filled their minds full of mush.
And the fact that he got, despite the police twice telling him good judgment, and as I put on the Facebook,
But we
page,
haven't disagreed.
misguided people. Well,
he was
when
a
you
dope.
set a series of events in motion.
And he
it could
owns
be murder.
responsibility
It could
for
be.
it. He owns responsibility for
When
setting
you set
motion.
set something in motion whereby your only option is to defend yourself with a gun. It's as close. If it isn't murder, it's as close as you can get without being it. And that's what these callers are saying. And I think it's kind of interesting that they agree in this case. And again, if Trayvon Martin is white, it doesn't happen. And that's the other critical factor.
And you know what? This type of stuff happens every day. Black, white, green, purple.
Sorry, Tracy's.
And you know what? Okay, Tracy was correct. I'm sure it happens a higher propensity
far
for
more.
African Americans. But okay. I know we'll have another show on African American versus African American violence. But if we're gonna ignore the context of that, I mean, I think that's just as silly.
But that's we're talking
I know we're not gonna talk about it today.
We're talking apples and oranges. In this case,
Yeah, but saying this was murder is apples and grapefruit.
Murder, it depends upon, as a columnist, I have a little more flexibility with the language. I would say manslaughter or reckless homicide. I don't think he intended to get to the point to shoot him, but I don't think he was that far away from it. I think he knew he had a gun. He took a risk he shouldn't have taken. And by the way, let's dive, it is hitting the 3:57 mark on our break.
Yeah.
Let's first of all thank all the callers. This was kind of fun. We did not get to half of what we planned today, but we need to thank Jeff Meyer for calling in again. Lawyer extraordinaire out of Sycamore. What's his law firm name again, Alan?
I know he's a partner. It was something Meyer.
Something in Meyer. We apologize, and sadly we can't connect to the internet of the station today to look it up and appear more professional. We also want to thank Tracy. That was a great call. We'd like to have you on some more.
There was also Mary,
and Dan, Jeff,
and Karen,
Rex,
Thomas, Tracy,
Thomas. Forgot about Thomas.
Yeah.
Mary, and Rex, yes, and Karen.
So I don't think you and I are going to agree on this, Alan, but I think we have certainly flushed out the topic.
Well, it's healthy to talk about this stuff.
Right.
If we don't talk about this stuff, it gets bottled up in a paper bag, and we are civil people. We can talk about this. All the people called in, we're civil. We can talk about these things, and it's good for society. Next week, maybe we'll have a chance to talk about Black on Black, but who knows? But I know that Representative Jack Franks is going to be on. He's a guy who's very critical of this Metro situation.
All right.
So we might have some good talks with him. Where do our listeners find you?
thefirstwar.no, they can't find me there. www.thefirstwar.net. I apologize for my allergies.
Or you can go to Woe Jesus and find him there.
Yeah,
WoJesus.com.
Yeah, I don't. That's like the new Google.
Yeah.
And we also have a Facebook page, and it's just if you type in left, right, and you should be able to get to us. My website is alanskillicorn.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at alanskillicorn. It should be simple enough, and I put stuff like this on my Twitter and blog all the time, and I've got some hard-hitting pension stuff coming up real soon, too.
And by the way, 1 minute left. Is Anthony Weiner done?
I think support for him is shrinking.
Yeah, as are other things.
But you know what?
And
his rise came up short.
His rise was in his shorts.
He's still running.
Can we handle any more Wiener?
Now, remember the Ward Kelly postulate. If you're married, one woman in your life is misery enough. There's no need to compound it with another. Thank you so much for listening.
This is Dr. Abraham Morgenthaler, author of Why Men Fake It. Listen up to the best radio station in Chicago, WRMN 1410.
In Elgin.